If a ceasefire is arranged, if the war finally gets negotiated to an end, it will be extremely likely that the West will work overtime to make Russia the evil, blameworthy scapegoat. And that will take some of the pressure off of China. The really original thing that the Chinese can do is to say to the world, really and seriously, we don't want to be another empire that then collapses. We are going to try to develop a genuinely multipolar world. On the ground in Ukraine, that war is already over. Russia has won Ukraine and the West have lost. The danger is that the West will be so upset by that loss that they will risk nuclear weapons. And then, of course, I have no idea where that takes the world. And I don't even want to think about it because it is so horrible. But here's the ironic way it may help. If a ceasefire is arranged, if the war finally gets negotiated to an end, it will be extremely likely that the West will work overtime to make Russia the evil, blameworthy scapegoat. And that will take some of the pressure off of China. And what you'll begin to see, and you're already seeing it, is a desperate effort led by the United States and Western Europe to separate China from Russia, to split, so that they can blame Russia and have China join, or at least stay away. The problem with that strategy is that for most Americans, they never see anything made in Russia. If you go to a store here in the United States, everything says made in China. Everything we buy, my shirt, my telephone, all the things here on my desk, they're made in China. Everybody in America knows China, right? They know that the electric cars are now coming from China, and they know that the solar panel that allows them to use the sun for electricity, it comes from China, et cetera, et cetera. So they can be told China is the evil. Nothing comes from Russia. Americans, I don't know what is imported from Russia, but you never see anything that says Russia. So that will make it more difficult. On the other hand, they have portrayed Mr. Putin as an evil warmonger. There's a warrant out for his arrest as a war criminal. They have turned Putin into Stalin. They have resurrected Stalin as a great evil, and Mr. Putin is a modern Stalin. So an enormous amount of work has been done, and they may stay with that, but that will put pressure on China, as you already have. American leaders go to China and tell you not to send the goods, not to trade with Russia, not to buy Russian oil and gas. I mean, China doesn't listen, and the Russians, I know, are grateful for that. The Indians don't listen either, and they buy the Russian oil and gas, and that made the Western sanctions against Russia useless. It has changed world history. But my guess is it's going to take a lot of work, and I hope the Chinese do that work, because it'll make it more likely that we succeed in having a world where we work out our differences rather than end up in warfare against one another. Because if you want to get an idea of where that leads, just look at Ukraine or look at Gaza, and you can see what warfare will do. It solves nothing and only makes everything much, much worse. It's our history. It's always the answer. It's our history. Let me give you an example. When the United States decided it did not want anymore to be a colony of Great Britain, which is how, remember, the British came to North America. They ethnically cleaned. That is, they slaughtered the people who lived here. The indigenous, original American people were killed in huge numbers by the arriving British. Okay? They set up a colony with settlers from Europe who came. Okay? Then at a certain point, 1776, these people here didn't want to be a colony anymore. And they said to England, we want independence. At that time, England was the great hegemonic power. The British fought 2 wars to repress independence. The War of Independence in 1776, and then a few years later, what was called the War of 1812, the second time Britain tried to destroy the independent country. So this country was born in a struggle against a hegemonic empire, Britain. That's why this is the way it thinks about the world. Over the 19th century, after it had defeated Britain in both of those wars, it began to economically develop as an independent country, and it saw its job as replacing Britain. They thought that's the way the world works. You've had the Roman Empire, the Greek Empire, the Turkish Empire, the British Empire, and now it's our turn. We have the American Empire. So they anticipated that it would last forever. This is a little childish, right? No empire has lasted forever. Every empire that went up also fell down at some point. But they didn't want to think about that, just like the British didn't want to think about the end of their empire. So after World War II, the United States discovered itself in an incredibly unique position. All the other potentially competitive economies had been destroyed. Britain, France, Germany, Japan, Russia, China. Many people killed, much destruction of railroads, of factories. You know the condition of all of the United States. No bomb fell here. With the exception of Pearl Harbor at the very beginning of the war, there was no combat here. The number of Americans killed much smaller than many other countries, and no destruction. In fact, the United States came out of a Great Depression in the 1930s, and the war picked the economy up. Half the unemployed people were given a uniform and put into the military, and the other half of the unemployed people got jobs in factories making the guns and the bullets and the uniforms that the people who went into the army used. So the irony was, at the end of the war in 1945, the United States was the absolutely dominant economic power. The rebuilding of Europe, the Americans paid for that. The Americans produced and literally shipped to Germany, France, the equipment, the machines, everything. So the last 75 years, from roughly 1945 to roughly 2010, 2015, have been the United States absolutely dominant. And given their history of one empire after another, including their own, their assumption is that that's what the Chinese are going to do. And as they watch Chinese competition becoming more and more successful in one industry after another, when they realize that people like Jack Ma and others have been able, with the government, to develop Chinese technology so that it competes with the most advanced technology in the West, well, then they can't understand anything else happening. That's why I said to you earlier, the really original thing that the Chinese can do is to say to the world, really and seriously, we don't want to be another empire that then collapses. We are going to try to develop a genuinely multipolar world. If the Chinese do that, and if they can successfully show that to the American people, that may be a very important way to convince the American people not to allow China to be scapegoated, to be blamed for things that they have no particular blame for. The Chinese offered, true, they offered Western capitalist enterprises labor, access to the Chinese market. They did. But they did that in exchange for technology and exchange for access to Western markets which they got. This was an exchange. Nobody had a gun to anybody else's head. It was a voluntary, mutually profitable exchange. If the Chinese can get that idea across, if they can make it credible that their goal is not to be the hegemon that replaces the United States, then you could get a very different history. But that is not easy to do, and I would urge those in China who are interested to be committed to this, but to be aware of the historical, ideological obstacles that create this problem for all of us.